everyone, thank you for tuning in. This is part 2 of the series on how to build your home recording studio. Today's video is again broken into several different parts, and each part will deal with a certain thing that is quite a key to a successful recording studio setup. Next week we'll get into all the details about actual specific gear, and today we'll do that only with headphones because we'll discuss how to record in a situation where outside and inside noise is a problem. Alright, so this probably is one of the most useful videos for the home recordist. Alright, so let's get started. Point 1 for this video is room orientation. Well, for room orientation we need to discuss a little bit of what we said last time, how the different dimensions of the room are very important in selecting the room, if you can. And if you cannot, at least to work with what you have so that you can avoid as many problems as possible. Let's say that you have the actual good room, which means you have a rectangular room where no dimension is the same as any other, nor is it a multiple, so you don't have the roof that's twice as high as the length and so on. Alright, so let's say you have that, and even if you don't, all the stuff that we're going to talk about right now will apply, so don't worry about that. Then maybe we'll get into a little more detail about sound conditioning, and that will help you smooth out any irregularities that come from the wrong room, so to speak. So the idea is, if you have a rectangular room, you want to sit, you want the speakers to fire on the length, on the long side. All right. So if the room is rectangular, you want to sit with the front to the shorter wall and with your back to the shorter wall, and then the long wall should be on your side. That gives the speakers quite a bit of room to, the sound that comes from the speaker, quite a bit of room to disperse. It will force the sound to bounce quite a few more times before it gets back to you. As you remember last week, we talked about the cubicle room, which was the nightmare room, because all these waves will travel exactly the same amount of time. And as sound is a definite speed, also they will travel at the same speed, and that will mean they'll all converge into certain spots. Okay, so orientating yourself vertically, so to speak, is actually the way to go. Alright, so if you have a rectangular room, make sure you're facing the short wall, and any windows should be, probably you have to work with what you have, but if you can choose, windows will be alright, probably on the long side behind you. Alright, you don't want them right next to you, but behind you is fine, or in the wall at the back. That's the way I have it set up here. And sometimes, as you know, you don't have a choice. This room, for example, either I have the window on the back side or I have it on the back side. So it's not something that's negotiable. But certainly, my window is all the way to one side. All right. So if I were to orientate the studio backwards, if instead of facing this way, if I were facing that way, which has the window would actually be right behind one of the speakers. Alright, so that's one of the problems. You do not want any change, and in this case a dramatic change in material and in sound response, of the actual material itself. You don't want that behind one of the speakers. As a matter of fact, it would be better to have two windows, even though they're bad for sound. It would be better to have two windows, one behind each speaker, than just one. Alright, because the response behind that speaker that has the window would be a lot different from the one that hasn't. So in my case, the best option was to have the window back there. I think in one of the books for recording, for building the studio, the ones I showed you last week, it says that it would be alright actually to have one window between the speakers, because then they will be shared the actual sound qualities of the material. It will be shared equally between both speakers. Alright, again, you have to work with what you have, but if you can keep this in mind when you're orientating your room, that would be great. What else for the room? Well, actually, we'll discuss now your placement and speaker placement as a separate point. So I guess this is it for room orientation, and let's move on to point 2. Alright, so now we've decided that we want to sit facing the short side of the room, the short wall, and so we have to figure out where exactly should we sit. The basic idea is that you want to sit somewhere that, independently of all the room conditioning and the sound, the foam and the bass traps, all this stuff, independently of all that you're already sitting in a spot where the effects of sound modes, which are these convergence points of sound waves that are bouncing around the room, is as little as possible, as small as possible. One rule that actually I'm using it in this studio, and it seems to work pretty well, is the rule of the 38%. So the idea is that you want to sit somewhere in the room, in the length of the room. You want to sit at 38% of the length facing the wall. Alright, so if the distance between the front wall and the back wall, if you were, let's make it simple, let's do 10 meters, you will want to sit at 3.8 meters, okay, facing that wall. Alright, so that's a very cool thing, and it also comes from, I think, both of these books, and I heard it in many studios. And that's the golden ratio. So you're sitting at a spot where presumably you don't get all the influence from the bouncing waves. Now that leaves you horizontally. How you want to sit is, of course, in the center of the room. Right? So if these waves do bounce around, you want them to reach your ears at the same time. So do not sit at 38% but slightly on the left or slightly on the right. You want to sit right in the middle. Alright, that's very important. Especially if you are orientating yourself vertically, because then the rooms will be quite close. Alright, so you'll hear the proximity effect of the walls will be quite pronounced. As for the speakers, where do you place the speakers? Well, first of all, you want the speakers to create a triangle between your ears and the two speakers. Now, if you're sitting at 38% of the room, that pretty much tells you where you want the speakers, because the desk will have a dimension, and then you put probably the speakers either right behind the desk like I have, or on top of the desk. So that will give you the distance between your ears and the speakers, and then you just have to spread them apart so that all the distances are equal. Again, if you can choose, I'll leave you a few tips also to place the speakers. Right? But the very first rule is that it is a triangle. In an equilateral triangle, it's very important that all sides are the same. Alright? That's very important. But if you can achieve that, and also keep in mind these few things that I'll tell you, then you'll get even better sound. So, one of the rules, and actually it's a key rule, although only second to the fact that it should be an equilateral triangle, is that the distance from the back wall should not be the same as the distance from the side wall. And you'll see this in sound design all the time. You do not want ever equal distances. Alright? And so if you have the speakers about 70 or 80 centimeters from the back wall, you probably want a different distance from the speaker to the sidewall, and then from the speaker to the sidewall. And again, you want it symmetrical, alright? So you want all those distances to be the same. Depending on the speakers, most speakers you'll be advised not to place them anyway, very close to the wall, because that will change the bass response and could kind of screw up your ear when you're listening to the mix. Alright, so a good separation, and then just make sure that it's not the same as from the sidewall. The speaker should be pointed inwards towards your ears, so that the cone of the speaker actually reaches your ear in a straight way. I mean, you don't want the speaker to be pointing that way. Alright, and you're sitting here, so the speaker should be like this, pointing at you. One thing though you might want to do is slightly angle the speaker so that the point of the triangle is not exactly at your ear, but slightly behind it. Alright, and that will help with the stereo separation. Right, so say you're here, I don't know how well this will go on video, but instead of doing this, you might want to open it just a little bit, so that the convergence point of these two lines is right behind your ear and not exactly at your ear. Alright, so that also works very well. That's pretty much it for speakers, actually. We'll discuss brands and maybe not brands, but a few pointers, and maybe even some brands and models in the last video. But for now, this is enough, and if you follow these few tips, you'll get much better sound even without touching the room or putting up any foam. Alright, so these 2 points really help a lot, and they're basic. And you'll be surprised how many studios don't even consider this. Mainly home studios, but sometimes professional studios I've been in, and they're full of modes everywhere. Alright, so do this and you'll get a lot better sound. Okay, point 3, and I know you guys have been waiting for this for the whole video, and probably the last part as well, is where I place the foam. I mean, there is this kind of strong emphasis on placing foam, although I insist that what I said so far is more important than that. Alright, selecting the room, placing all your stuff properly in the room is much more important than where you place your foam. But foam does have an importance. We won't discuss, widths and thickness and all that of the foam, because this is not really the place. It will take forever. So let's say you have the foam, any foam you have, and you can research a bit on what kind of foam and what thickness. But let's say you have that already taken care of. Where do you actually place the foam? As I told you last week, I have the whole roof here is soundproof. All right, so I have the actual material that absorbs the sound, and then a whole layer of foam, of acoustic foam, on top of the ceiling, and then from there, there's an air, like an air bubble that separates the actual construction of the wall from the ceiling. And then, of course, on top of that, there's a floating device to float the whole room. You probably don't have to do that at your house, all right? Especially if you don't want to do all the work. Maybe you're renting, or maybe it's not your house, and you can't do it. So one good option is for the ceiling just to treat the area right on top of your head. All right, so take, maybe you're sitting here, then imagine like a big carpet on the floor, and then transpose it up, and cover that area with foam. For all foam, actually, for all of it, you get more results, especially in the bass frequencies, if you take the foam and you separate it slightly from the wall. All right, so instead of just gluing the tape to the wall, you can glue the foam. You could actually glue it to cardboard or any kind of material that makes it a bit stable, and then separate it maybe a couple inches or 4 or 5 centimeters from the wall. That will allow the foam to actually work against the higher frequencies and middle frequencies, and then the air trap between the wall and the foam will work against the bass frequencies. Alright, so that's really good advice. Okay, so just place 2 or 3 panels on top of your head, and that should be good actually for whatever we're doing. Now, behind the speakers, you can and maybe you should place foam. It's not necessary, but it is a good idea, so I always have foam behind the speakers. And then in the back of the wall, in the back wall, you can have either foam or you can have diffusion. Diffusion is different than absorption. Absorption just captures the waves and tries to trap them so that they don't go out into the room again. Refraction, what it does is the diffusion. Sorry, what it does is the waves come in and they hit a non-homogeneous surface. So what happens is, you might have seen them sometimes, I put a picture up in the video, there are these weird wood constructions, and they're made of wood or plastic, and they come up at all different heights and angles, and so when the wave comes in, it diffracts into all different kinds of directions, right? And so that avoids the waves bouncing back at you when you're mixing. I have actually a big bookshelf with different kind of things. It's made of squares, and I have each square just kind of a bit of a different setup. So the waves that bounce against that will bounce at different angles. And then I have foam also, but the back wall is kind of a thing that you'll do if you can. All right. Now let's talk about the most important spot to put foam, and that's at the first reflection point. When your speakers are working, of course, the main beam of sound will come at you. If you've done your work from point 2, you will come directly to your ears. But sound travels in all directions. So what happens is, most of the sound will come to you, but some of the sound will go on the side, and when it goes on the side, it will hit your side wall, which is closest to you, and both of them, hopefully, you've done properly, and they will be at the same distance, and then will come back right at your ears. Now, the sound that comes straight from the speakers will take a certain time to get to your ears, but the sound that has to do this will take slightly longer because it's traveling more. That creates a difference in the wave phase, and it will actually screw up your mix. So it's very important to deaden the amount of sound that bounces from the sidewall. Okay, and in the Gallagher book, I think, there's a great tip that says that to find the point of first reflection, all you have to do is sit in your spot, looking straight ahead, and then have a friend of yours with a mirror, just the mirror touching the sidewall, just slowly move it towards you and away from you, right, on the sidewall. At one point, you will see the cone of the speaker in the mirror. That's the point of first reflection. All right, so you want to treat that, and you want to treat around it. Okay, so probably most of the foam in your studio should be at the point of reflection, and maybe right before and right after. And I'll show you a little video how I have it set up. Okay, so that's pretty much it for foam. Let's move on to point 4. Alright, point 4 is actually something that we'll share between this video and the next. Today we'll discuss the concept of working with noise problems. Noise problems, you usually think that the noise problem is that outside noise comes in when you're tracking, but for most people with a home studio, the big problem is that they generate too much sound, too much noise. Some of you have a day job and you get home at night and you can't just fire up your amp and play guitar or record from your 412 cabinet because you know, you just can't do it. I think in most countries that's illegal. We have problems when you're mixing. I mean, mixing should be done at a decent volume. You don't want to go high, but you still have to be able to hear everything. And if you do it at 3 o'clock in the morning, then that's also out of the question if you live in an apartment or in a house with neighbors. Alright, so most of the time the problem is the noise coming in. Although there are noisy neighbors, usually the amount of noise you get from outside is not comparable to a full Marshall stack you know, you use for recording. So it's very important to have a plan, and before I got this studio I did everything direct. I recorded all my guitars, or almost all of them, direct, and I mixed during the day if I could with normal speakers, you know, and if I was working at night, then I was mixing with headphones. Okay, so we'll talk about two things today. First, how to get the sound you want direct, and then how to maybe mix it or do the first steps of mixing and editing with headphones, and I'll have a few advice on brands and models. Okay, so to record, if you play, you know, if you play I don't know, if you play synthesizers, then it doesn't really matter because you'll be recording direct, right? So the people with the most problems are drummers, of course, that's the number one, guitar players, and to a certain extent singers. These three guys have the most problem recording good sounds at home because they cannot generate the sound that they need to have good sound, right? Most of the stuff we're talking about, voice, drums, and guitars, produce better sound at higher volumes. And you know, it's out of the question if you live in an apartment. So for drums, a great way to do it is using electronic drums. Even if you're not too happy with the sounds that come with the drum kit, right now, you know, with MIDI, you can send these MIDI information to your computer and have a drum dedicated plugin. They're not too expensive. I think for $300 you get some of the best on the market, and the sound they have are great, you know, and most people would not be able to tell if you were playing real drums or not. And of course they are real drums. I mean, you're playing yourself, but you're just using sounds instead of setting up your own microphones and stuff like that. You're actually using sounds that somebody else recorded in a studio. I don't know, one of the really good ones is Superior Drummer. It's a very good software. The guys from Avid, the guys that make Pro Tools, also have one that's called Strike, which is very good for the price, very good software. And I used quite a few of them, and usually, you know, depending on what you're doing, they're all good. And maybe you should go by features and price. You know, that's probably the two things you are most concerned about. If you're a professional musician, then you probably already know all the brands you like, so I won't get into that. Okay, so for drums, an electronic drum kit is a good investment. As a matter of fact, we have one here. I'll show you maybe up here in the video, this way. But it's not in the studio right now because we were doing some recording and it's in another room. For vocals, I'm sorry there, I cannot help because you will have to generate the sound yourself, and so the only thing I can say is you do it in the afternoon when you're not bothering anyone. So that's the only instrument that I cannot help you with, and most singers will find a recording studio to record anyway. So you could do all your tracks at home and then just rent a room or a studio for a few days and do your vocals. For guitars, I hate the sound of digital devices to generate a sound. I'm a big fan of tube amps, and I'm a big fan of loud tube amps, and I have been a fan of that way before I had my own studio, and I had to work with it from an apartment, or from different apartments actually. I've been traveling for many years and moving my stuff around from flat to flat, and always had to worry about that. So the best solution for this is to get a device that is a speaker simulator. I've been using it extensively, and even now that I can work, and I do work with big speaker cabinets, I still use it a lot. One of the ones I use the most, and I've been using it for many years, is the Palmer PGA-04. It's a standard in the industry. I think every studio you go to will have one, and it's a great unit and very simple. What you do is you just go from the output of the speaker output of your guitar head. So if you have, for example, one of these amps, you just take the output, and instead of going into a speaker cabinet, you go into this unit. This unit will absorb the power of the amp, so you won't blow it up, and you'll get just one cable out. It's one microphone cable, and from that you can go into your recording gear and just record direct. They're made to simulate, or at least to create the illusion of having a real cabinet, so you have some control. You have trebles and highs and lows, you have different kind of simulations of open back and closed back speaker cabinets and so on. So the Palmer is the one I've been using the most for many years. Then there's this one, it's called SPL Transducer, which is also a very good unit. And there's also other ones from different brands. So that's, for the guitarist, is a necessity. Even if you have the luxury of having a place where you can actually use speaker cabinets, you should always have something like this. It's great for live and it's great in the studio. You can multi-track guitars. It's just a great option. All right, and so that works great. Now for so that's it for recording. Now if you're mixing, what you want to do is have a great pair of headphones. And people always just get the first pair of headphones they find in the house, or they go to the store and they get, oh well, look, it's from a good brand and it's $39 and I'll buy it. Don't do that. Invest in your headphones. Headphones always will save you if in any situation. All right. So for example, I use these headphones. These are by Sennheiser and they're called HD600. These are very expensive headphones. All very good headphones are expensive. But they're worth it, because with these, in case of emergency, you can actually do a mix, or a good part of a mix with these. You can trust them. You can track perfectly with this, as long as you're not tracking vocals, for example, because they are open headphones. So the open design allows sound to come in and go out. They're much more comfortable. They work great in the studio because you can talk to people while you're using them. And these headphones are great. Some other classic brands. Sony, the 7601s are 7609, sorry, they're classic. There's AKG 240 Studio. That's another classic headphone. I have it actually at the house right now. So headphones, please. I always give this advice to people: do not be cheap with headphones. Go out and buy the best headphones you can find. I'm sure I don't go on forums, but I'm sure on recording forums everywhere you'll find advice. But if you want my advice, I never played through headphones that were better than this, the HD600 by Sennheiser, and people will have opinions, but I don't think anyone will be able to say that these are bad headphones. Okay, so check them out if you want to. What else? I think that's it for today. So we discussed a few things that are very important. I think maybe this video is the most important of the three. And then next week we'll get into actual gear that you need for the studio. So if you have this much money to spend, what should you spend it in? And we'll talk about actually using gear that produces sound. You know, we won't try to hide behind speaker simulators. We'll actually try to get the best sound possible from the gear we have, and so that assumes that you either can make a lot of noise or you have a studio. But even then, the part 3 of the series will have to deal with a lot of stuff that will be very useful for home studio recording situations. Alright? I hope you like this second part of the series, and I'll see you next week for part 3. Actually make that 2 weeks, because I'm waiting for the speaker cabinet from Germany, and when that comes in, I'll do the video on that part. Alright? Well, I'll see you in a couple of weeks then. Bye bye.